So last Sunday after the service was over, I was talking to a family in our church, Paul and Cindy Caruso. I asked them for permission to share this with you today. And they own a construction company called Corbin Construction. They build homes, remodel homes. Listen, man, they're awesome. They're incredible. And so Paul and Cindy, thanks for letting me share this today, what they shared with me. So recently they're remodeling a home over here in Leesburg. When they went to replace the windows and they opened up the wall to replace the windows, what they found is what's in this box. I'm going to carefully hold it up here so I don't mess it up. Newspapers from Orlando from Friday, December the 23rd, 1949. So all in here are all kinds of articles. For example, one of the highlights on this paper from this day was that President Harry Truman said, and I quote, "I don't think Ike is a good candidate." Speaking of Dwight Eisenhower. There's an article about Governor Fuller Warren being released from the hospital just a few weeks earlier because of a nervous and physical breakdown and exhaustion. There's ads in here. One of them's for a 1950 Oldsmobile. Put $300 down and you can own a brand new Oldsmobile for a big $949. Or maybe you want to put some new tires on that car. A full set of tires would be $42. That includes the mounting charges. Man, some of you might remember 1949. I can tell you I wasn't even a thought in 1949 other than to God. There's some really cool things in here. You can get your wheels balanced for $2.49. Man, you can't even go to McDonald's for $2.49, let alone get your wheels balanced. You can buy a Zenith radio, which here's what they're saying. You'll get worldwide reception. That sounds like XM radio to us today. And you can do a payment plan or you can just do it monthly for $6.09 and had worldwide. Listen, this is pretty amazing stuff. Matter of fact, when I started putting together today some illustrations to help us understand this today, and I thought about this, I went on and I started looking on the internet for some other really crazy stories similar to this. And one of the things that I came across was this couple that were renovating a home, and as they're renovating their home, and they did the same thing you guys did, they found a note inside the home, in the wall, of a bathroom, their master bath they were renovating. And when they opened up the note, here's what the note said. We got a picture of the couple that left the note. This is the couple that left the note. "Hi, we're the Shinzitskis. We remodeled this bathroom in the summer of '95. If you're reading this, that means you're remodeling the bathroom again. So what's wrong with the way we did it?" I love that. I love that. I thought that was pretty creative. I found it pretty humorous. Well, we are in a series of talks, and by the way, I'm a pastor that tracks trends in the church world, and right now, probably one of the talked about trends in the church world is how churches are experiencing kind of that summer lull, that summer blahs, and attendance is down and giving's down. And I want to tell you, man, when I walked in, this place is electric and on fire, and there's no summer lull here at the fellowship. You guys are getting after it, and so I am pumped about what's happening. And we are in the middle of a series of conversations that we've called Shine, and it's about people that lived before us, like these illustrations, people that lived before us, and they left for us a note, a message, something that we could take from their life, make application into our life. And week number 1, we talked about a guy by the name of Joseph, and we really examined his life. But here was the point, if you had a bigger picture to week number 1 from just a few weeks ago, it would be that God always sees the bigger picture in our lives. And what God does maybe in this day might be setting the table for something 20 and 30 years down the road for His glory through you. That's pretty powerful. Last week we talked about a guy by the name of Moses. And if I kind of bottom lined our talk about Moses from last week, it was about God keeping his word. He always keeps his word, and we can trust him. So today, I want us to look at another character, and it's going to kind of piggyback on the life of Moses. And I just believe this is going to be fantastic for all of us. And it's a guy by the name of Joshua. I'm a fan of Joshua. I think he's one of the great Bible characters that live by faith. But Joshua was handpicked by God to be the successor to lead the people of Israel after Moses died. And the message that Joshua, if you don't hear anything else I say, I'll give you kind of the bottom line right here, is God can do the impossible. So if you're here today going, man, I need God to do something, I just want to remind you, God can do the impossible. And I don't want you to miss that. Don't underestimate. Whether it's in your marriage, in your child, in your workplace, in your home, in your community, in this place, God can do the impossible. When some people said, David, are you aware that Bashville Park is, and then they give some kind of a description or an adjective. Here's what I know. In every dark place, there has to be a remnant of the light of the gospel. And that's what God's called us to. And we are a light in a dark place, whether that's Bashville, Leesburg, Eustis, Howey, Umatilla, Yalaha, Fruitland Park, Mineola. Listen, you put the label of the town on it, and I promise you, you press in deep enough, you'll find darkness. And God has called the church to be light in a dark place. So Moses is an interesting guy from last week. And we talked about how he was the guy who God chose to come in, and he used 10 plagues to release the people from Egypt. They had been slaves there for 400 years, and now they're going to be set free, and they're released. And Moses walks them up to the edge of the Red Sea. He parts the waters of the Red Sea, and they walk across on dry land. And when they get to the other side, man, the people, it's like they just forgot everything that they just saw God do, and they end up in the wilderness for quite a lengthy time, about 4 decades in the desert. During that time, God brings manna from heaven. I've preached on this several months ago. I called them Krispy Kremes. God brought Krispy Kreme from heaven, fed the people every single day, and he gave water to them out of a rock. How cool is that? I'm reminding us of this because of God's miracles. And we can read this in Scripture and go, yeah, but Pastor, that stuff happened 4,000 years ago. Man, this is a new day, a new era. God's doing something different. Let me tell you, God's the same. And he wants to do something special and unique in your life. I don't know if that's going to be a rock pours out water so that your family can drink when you don't have clean water. God can do it. He's done it before. But what I do know is in everything that it is that God did, it always pointed back to him. The intent of these miracles that God did were not to glorify the man, the individual. It was to glorify God. And Moses is walking the people around in the wilderness. They're lost in the wilderness. They're living like nomads. And because of their rebellion in the wilderness, God said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to wipe out every single generation that saw me do a miracle of parting the Red Sea, opening up the waters to walk across. I'm going to wipe out an entire generation. But there will be a remnant. And he mentions 2 guys, Joshua and Caleb. There you go, Caleb. Somewhere in here, I saw Caleb earlier. Caleb and Joshua are the remnant that God said, I'm going to do something unique through you guys. That's the guy we're talking about today, Joshua. And so I'm just going to mention 2 of the miracles that happened right off the bat in Joshua's life. So Joshua is a young guy listening to the people, his ancestors, his parents and grandparents and all the friendships. He's listening to them whine and complain in the wilderness. Joshua draws close to the Lord. In a generation that saw God do miracles, their complaining and their murmuring led to God saying, okay, you're not going to see the promised land, but the next generation will. Because of your complaining, because of your whining, because of your lack of faith and trust in me, I'll raise up another generation, and here comes Joshua. Miracle number 1. We'll call it the crossing of the Jordan. Now, right off the bat, you would think this would be something they would all understand. You've got to remember, they aren't the ones that crossed the Red Sea. It was their parents and their grandparents. So they've sat around the campfire, pita bread on the grill, and they've eaten it listening to Grandpa tell the story. Listen, man, let me tell you, one day we walked across, and as we looked at the walls, we could see the fish in the sea, or whatever Grandpa said. Now, these kids are growing up having never seen it. Now, all of a sudden, they're standing on the banks of the Jordan River. What Moses had done by taking them to the Red Sea, now Joshua, the next generation leader, leads them up to the banks of the Jordan. I actually have a map so you can understand it. Here's a map of Israel, kind of present day. And the Jordan starts all the way up there at the top. And from, if you see kind of it towards about 2/3 of the way up, Sea of Galilee all the way down to the Dead Sea, that covers about 70 miles. But the Jordan River winds for about 200 miles in total through the region. And in all of this, it starts at the top of Mount Hermon. And at the top of Mount Hermon in the springtime, the snow starts to melt. And as the snow melts, man, it starts to rush. Because it's going from 7,000 feet above sea level down to the Dead Sea, 1,200 feet below sea level. That water has to move quickly. And Joshua brings the people up to the banks of the Jordan River during this time. Waters are rushing. If you've ever been around something like whitewater rafting, you know, man, those rocks under the water, it doesn't have to be deep. It can be swift and painful. And that water can hurt you. It can sweep you away quickly. And as the people come up to the banks of the river, they recognize this dangerous situation. And well over 1 million people stand on the edge of the river waiting for Joshua, their leader. What do we do? And God begins to give instruction. Joshua chapter 3. Joshua chapter 3, here's what the Word of God says in verse number 8. When you reach the banks of the Jordan River, take a few steps into the river and stop there. Verse 13, as soon as their feet touch the water, the flow of water will be cut off upstream, and the river will stand up like a wall. Now, you talk about cool. And this is exactly what happened on that day. The people see the banks of the Jordan create a wall so they can cross over. Miracle number 1. Miracle number 2, we're going to call right after this, would be the first city that they come to, and we're going to label this conquering Jericho. So they've seen the miracle now. This is a whole new generation that has grown up out in the wilderness in a tent, eating Krispy Kreme from heaven. And now, it sounds good, but do that for 40 years, you'll get tired of it. Some people have even asked me, you know, David, do you have a bucket list? I do, and Krispy Kreme is on my bucket list. And it's not that I would eat a Krispy Kreme, but I literally want to lay on the conveyor belt at Krispy Kreme. And I just want to go through, like in my swim shorts, I just want to go through the conveyor belt and let them douse me. All right, so anyway, I don't know why I'm sharing that with you, but sorry for that image. So they're conquering Jericho. Let's come back to reality. They're conquering Jericho. Now, here's what you need to know about this miracle. The Canaanite people live in Jericho. These are a rough crowd, man. These people make ISIS seem like good, welcome home neighbor type of people. The Canaanite people are not cool. They're brutal, savages. But they're also known as a very significant military force in the region. And the Canaanite people, although they are big and strong and powerful, they do something really unique in this time. They build a wall around their city so that they can't be broken into. Now, you got to envision that down in the valley, as you come up to Canaan, you're going up a hill, and the first thing you're going to see is a wall that's somewhere between 20 and 30 feet in height. Now, to give perspective, this ceiling from where you're sitting to the top of the ceiling is around 19 feet. So imagine coming up a hill. That wall is going to look enormous. It's about 12 feet in width, about 6 feet in width. And so it's a big, thick stone wall all the way around the city. And anybody walking up to it are going to think, there's no way we're getting into this. Once you get past that first wall, then there's an inner wall. A second wall, as you come up the hill, another wall of about 20 feet in height. But this one is 12 to 14 feet in width. Large enough that Scripture says they could drive chariots on top of it. So imagine you get over the first wall. You want to conquer Jericho, and you get over the first wall, you get to the second wall, and you're like, oh, man, are you kidding me? So these people have fortified their city. And here come the Israelites, and God has said, I'm going to give you this city. Now, they don't have formal military training. They've been living in the wilderness. And here's what God says. In Joshua chapter number 6, verse number 2, the Word of God says, but the Lord said to Joshua, I've given you Jericho. I've given you its king. I've given you all of its strong warriors. You and your fighting men should march around the town once a day for 6 days. 7 priests will walk ahead of the ark. That's the box that God lived in. Each carrying a ram's horn. And on the 7th day, you're to march around the town 7 times with the priest blowing the horns. When you hear the priest give one long blast on the ram's horn, have all the people shout as loud as they can. Then the walls of the town will collapse, and the people will charge. The people can charge straight into the town. I can just tell you, according to history and from the Word of God, that's exactly what happened. Day number 1, the priests led the march. These aren't fighting warrior priests. They're just priests. And they walk around that big, massive, fortified city carrying their ram's horn. Now, imagine what's going through their mind as they look up on top of that wall and they see the beast of the warriors, the Canaanites. And the Canaanite people, like you guys, are laughing at them. What are those silly priests doing, carrying those horns? Why are those people following them? What's the little box they're carrying? And day 1 comes to an end. They go back to their tents. They lay down at night thinking, well, that was an interesting exercise. And they get up the next morning and do it again for 6 days. And on the 7th day, they walk around it 7 times with the Canaanite people looking over the balcony of their wall. And man, when those horns blew, anybody know how to blow a ram's horn in here? All right, I took a shot. When they blew that horn, those horns, the people shouted. Imagine what that sounded like. As the people, the Canaanite people, are looking over their balcony going, what are you guys doing? Well, boy, we're really scared of you now. You shout really good. Until they begin to feel the rumble of their fortified city. 12 feet of concrete and block and stone begin to rumble under their feet. They weren't laughing anymore. Hey, get everybody down. Get everybody down. Back up. Everybody retreat. Get back. Get back. And here come the people of God, and God gave them Jericho. Miracle, man. Unbelievable. What looks something like it is impossible, God says this is completely possible. Now, let me bring it into a modern day illustration. Anybody ever seen one of my favorite movies of all time? Anybody ever seen this movie called Hoosiers? You ever seen this movie, Hoosiers? Anybody? Okay, a few of you. Listen, if you're in Next Generation, you've never seen Hoosiers, you need to get this movie, check it out. I'm a basketball fan, so it's a great basketball film. Filmed, a true story from 1954 about this little bitty school called Hickory. And Hickory has a great basketball team on this particular year, and they go all the way through the season, all the adversity that comes along with a basketball season for high school kids. And they're not overly big, but they've got some good shooters, and they've got good defense and all these things. And little school Hickory, out of the woods, out of the country, show up in Indianapolis to play the state championship game, something nobody ever thought they would get to. And when they walk into the arena where they're going to play in Indianapolis, they look around, and they are like, oh, we've never seen anything like this. Matter of fact, I can show it to you in this quick clip. Check this out.
Buddy, hold this into the backboard. What is it? 15 feet. 15 feet. Strap, put Ollie on your shoulders. Measure this from the rim. Buddy? How far? 10 feet. 10 feet. I think you'll find it's exact same measurements as our gym back in Hickory. Okay, let's get dressed for practice.
I don't know about you, but there are times in my life things seemed impossible. Something happens in my life, whether that's professionally or family, with a friend, and I look at that situation and go, man, this is impossible. But with God, all things are possible. I don't want you to miss what God has for you today. Because there are going to be times in life you're going to walk in and go, too big. That wall is too thick. That sea and that water are rushing too fast. I'm going to retreat. It's much safer over here. It's much safer on this side of town. It's much safer over here because I've got the income over here, or I've got the people over here, or I've got the facility over here. I'm just going to stay when God's saying, no, it's time to go. So listen. What seems impossible for you is very possible with God. Some of you will recognize the picture of this gentleman on the screen. It's Walt Disney. We're just down the street. If you're watching by way of internet, we're not far from Disney, maybe a 45-minute drive, 50-minute drive from here. And he has created maybe one of the most famous places for people to go on the planet. What's interesting, several years ago, I had done some research on this gentleman, and one of the things that I would just say about him is he's probably one of the great vision casters of the 20th century. And one of the things that stuck out to me when you read the story of Walt Disney is that he had a unique way of casting vision. He says by his own admission that anytime that he walked into the boardroom, talking about his adventures with Disney, when he walked into the boardroom and he pitched an idea that seemed so out there, so unbelievable, And everybody in the room had something negative to say, or they're shaking their head no, or they're going, oh, we don't have enough money. I don't think that's possible. Oh, that's never been done. When he heard that, he always said, then that's the thing I want to do. Matter of fact, he put a label on it. We don't talk about it very much, but it's called unanimous disagreement. And he encourages business leaders to examine when there's unanimous disagreement. Now, I share that with you to say there are times in my life that I feel that way. When everyone else goes, man, I'm not sure, David. Man, I'm not sure that can be accomplished. David, I'm not sure that's the right spot. David, I'm not sure that's the right way. When everybody is unanimous against that vision, there's a side of me that goes, oh my, then this is the place for God to do his greatest work. And I get pretty excited about it. Those of you that are on our elder team, man, if you want to walk in tomorrow night to the elder meeting and give me lots of no's, that's probably what we're going to do then. I'm just kidding with you. It's called unanimous disagreement. And my guess is, my hunch is, that there are people that all of us can look at and go, man, we'd like to be a little bit more like them. I'd like to have the faith. And you can read about the Hall of Faith in the New Testament. I'd like to be a little bit more like this type of leader. I'd like to be a little bit more like that couple. I'd like to be a little bit more, I'd like this. But there's also people I think we would all agree with. There's some people maybe we don't want to be like. That person that retreats. That person that's intimidated by the large wall. The person that's intimidated by the rushing waters. And we go, man, I want to be able to be that person that can step across. When God says, step into the water, I want to have the faith to step into the water. When God says, walk around the city and carry the ram's horns, you can win this battle because here's what I promised you. You can defeat them because I'm with you. I want to be that person. And when it seems like everything is impossible, it is those who trust God with that impossibility to see God do something extraordinary. Listen, some of you in here, I want to remind you, God does not have the word impossible in his vocabulary. Well, God, I don't know, man. I don't know that you'll ever change my husband. Man, I'm telling you, God can change your husband. I don't know that I don't know that we're ever going to get above ground financially. Listen, man, God can do something extraordinary in your finances. I don't know that my child's ever going to return home. Let me just remind you, God is in the heart-changing business. Well, I just don't know, Pastor, if I'm ever going to walk like I used to walk or run like I used to run. Let me tell you, God's still in the healing business. I don't know that I'm ever going to get that promotion. I don't know that I'll ever get that job. I just want to remind you, God is still in that business. I don't know that I'm ever going to finish my education. I wanted that degree. I wanted to accomplish this. I want to remind you what seemed impossible to you, God says is possible. And it's critical that we understand that the word impossible, it does not exist in God's vocabulary. So today, when God stops the Jordan rivers for the people to walk across to show and teach a whole new generation that they can trust him, that he can be counted on, that his word will stand. That's why we sang the song that we did. God, you promised it. I'm going to claim it. Because God can do what you and I cannot do. When God brought down the walls of Jericho, it changed the perspective of this generation. And listen, the things that he's done over the course of time blows us away. As a matter of fact, I was done with all of my sermon, and I started thinking on Tuesday, what are some of the really crazy miracles that God has done? And I started jotting some of them down. The list became overwhelming, so I thought, all right, let me cut back and just show you some of the miracles that God has done. God spoke through a donkey. Now, the other day, I'm driving down the road. I've got my daughter Dayla with me, and we passed this little house on the right. It was in Howey in the Hills, going out towards the turnpike, and they've got two donkeys out there, and we both started laughing. And I said, what do you think of when you see a donkey? And she was telling me, and I said, well, I'm preparing a sermon for this Sunday. I think about the time God let a donkey speak. That's pretty crazy, isn't it? I don't know. I found it pretty crazy. I'm not even going to say what I was going to say on the donkey. I was going to change his name a little bit. But a dumb donkey speaks. How about God walking on water? Have you ever walked on water? That's pretty crazy, isn't it? And we're not talking a step or two. He walked across the sea. God healed a blind man with mud. He reached down, grabbed some mud, put it on your eyes, and this man could see. God raised dead people to life. Man, imagine Lazarus had been dead for 3 days. The body had begun to reek. God raises him from the dead. God made an axe head float on water one day. That's pretty cool. God fed thousands of people with just one boy's little brown bag lunchbox. God made something out of nothing. And when I jotted this down, I was thinking, what is some of the greatest miracles of all time? Perhaps this might be one of the biggest. God spoke, and this galaxy, this universe came into existence. Talk about a miracle. Now, am I the only one that gets excited at the miracles of God? I mean, you guys are just looking at me like, okay, yeah, that's cool. Okay, what's the next miracle? The universe came into place. How about this one? God took a 100-year-old man and a 99-year-old woman to have their first baby. There's a miracle. Anybody over 60 in the room? Can I get a witness to that one? You ready to have a baby right now, ladies? All right, then. Some of you guys are like, hey, let's go home and try right now. I get it. God parts the Red Sea. He parts the Jordan River. He allows a guy to get swallowed up by a massive fish and live to tell about it. How cool is that? Imagine you're the guy that gets to pen the words of what it's like to be inside the belly of a fish. Well, there was seaweed wrapped around my head. It didn't smell very good, and boy, he took this massive bite out of another fish, and woo, and that came down the pipes and landed right in my lap. Oh. How about this? A little teenage girl becomes expectant with a child, a virgin. Imagine the story around that town. Imagine how her parents had to defend her position. Well, she's telling us she's not done it. But she's not just pregnant, she's pregnant with God. I mean, come on. That's pretty big. Thanks, Leo. How about the time that God said, I'm going to leave heaven. I'm going to step off of my throne and step down into humanity and strap on flesh. And not will I won't even come in the form of royalty. I'm going to come in the form of a baby. Vulnerable, in need of help from a human. And the God of the universe who spoke it all into existence humbled himself to come into humanity. Talk about a miracle. How about the time that a group of buddies named Daniel and his 3 friends get thrown into a fiery furnace so hot that when the guys opened up the door, they're consumed by the heat and the fire, but these 4 guys go into the burning incinerator and live to tell about it. Talk about a miracle. Don't think for a minute that God can't do something in your life. How about the time that he took some water at the wedding after everybody had finished and he said, now bring out the water, and he makes the finest wine, his first public miracle? Or how about that time that God said, walk around the walls every day, and on the last day 7 times, and blow a horn. Make sure my ark is out in front, and when you do, I will bring those walls to a crumbling. What man took years to build, God brought down in seconds so that his people could inherit the land. And don't you think for a moment God can't restore your marriage. Don't think for a moment He can't bring health back to your body. Don't think for a moment that He can't bring back what you've lost. Don't think for a moment what the enemy has stolen from you, God can't restore, because God is still in the business of bringing reconciliation and restoration into the life of people. So band, come on up and join me. We're gonna sing. It's gonna be amazing. But before we close out today, I want to remind you, I posted on Tuesday a little post on my Facebook account that said, hey man, I want to hear from you. What are some of the miracles that God has done? And through email and Facebook and private messaging, over 160 of you have responded and growing, saying, here's something that God has done in my life. Man, I printed out the list and I'm reading through it. There were times I was crying. There were times I literally in my office went, man, praise you, God, for what you have done. There are people in this room right now. You have been healed from cancer and you are here to talk about it. There are people in this room right this very moment that you could not have children, and God has given you babies, and you are now an unbelievable parent. There's a couple in this room, couldn't have children, and they got 2 awesome kids in this room today. And what seemed impossible to them, God showed up and made it possible. There are people in this room. There is a guy that is in this place today that was an alcoholic his entire life. He started drinking as a teenager. But about the time he started to have children, he said, I need to make a change, and he met God. And 14 years ago, he gave up his last drink, and he's not been an alcoholic since and never had a drink of alcohol since. Talk about a way that God works. There's somebody in this room, you've been healed for cancer, and you are 10 years free from it. A couple that said, in this room, there's a couple that said, we are done, we are separating, and we're going to file for divorce. And God showed up in your marriage, and you're sitting in this room right now as a living testimony of what God can do to restore a marriage. And you are thriving in marriage now. As a matter of fact, that couple that I'm speaking to right now has now become a testimony to other couples on how to do marriage. I mean, come on. Are you serious that you don't think God can still do something great? Man, you are underestimating the God of this universe. We got a guy in our church that sat in prison for years, committing a horrible crime. And while in prison, met a chaplain and gave his life to Jesus. And over a period of time, was discipled by the chaplain, started leading a small group, and eventually was placed on parole. And now this guy serves faithfully in the life of this church. Now let me tell you, that's a miracle. Now some of you may look around and go, well, I want to know who that guy is, because I want to stay away from that guy. Well, it's Douglas. No, it's not really. I'm just kidding. It's not Douglas. Listen, the point is that God can do the impossible. And I don't want you to miss what God did in Joshua's life, a guy that was listening to the stories as the men and the women would tell it to their children and their grandchildren, because Joshua witnessed it firsthand. His buddy Caleb witnessed it firsthand. And God said, you know what? Because you guys have chosen to forget about me, because you guys have chosen to say, you know what, we can't trust God, I'm going to wipe out that generation. And Joshua, I'm going to raise you up, and I'm going to prove to you. And here's what Joshua did. He obeyed God. He prayed, and he acted. So I want you to know, if you're looking for God to do something in your life, you need to come in a humble state of obedience to Him. If you don't know Jesus today, that's your first step of obedience. God, I need to give you my life. Here's how you do that. You believe that Jesus died on a cross, was buried for 3 days, and rose again. And the Word of God says that when you confess it by mouth, that's called prayer, and believe in your heart, faith, that you too can be saved. Listen, that's not a respecter of persons. Everyone has the ability to come to know Jesus. So if you don't know Jesus today, miracle number 1 is today you can have new life found in Jesus Christ and Him alone. Nobody else can forgive sin. Only Jesus can forgive sin. So maybe that's the miracle that needs to happen in your life. Maybe you're here and you're a believer, and it's time to get out of the closet and stop fearing what the enemy is telling you and start believing what God has demonstrated already and say, I'm just going to believe God. I'm going to follow in obedience. I'm going to trust Him. I'm going to pray, and I'm going to follow His word, and I'm going to expect that God's going to do something great. Friends, God can do what only God can do.